The goblins woke to find their captive gone. How had she managed to sever her bonds? The goblins searched the web of tunnels during the following hours, but found no sign of Galea. They were confused and angry, and they argued and fought amongst themselves, each blaming the other for the loss of their prize. Now they had lost their bargaining power to obtain and finally destroy the Book of Light, and knew that the dark stranger would return soon, and that the great Lord Org would be angry at their negligence. All the while, Galea was being safely cared for in the fantasy forest amongst the woodland elves. Galea had spent the last few days in the home of Thoran's brother, Eoron, and his wonderful family. Thoran had shown her the forest and their way of life. She had become very close to Laena, who had lovingly nurtured her back to health with her herbs and potions, and their two offspring, Laela and Thomasine, had entertained her with songs and stories. Galea felt so at home here with Thoran and the woodland elves, but she knew that a carriage was on its way from Fjellfusrin to take her home, and that she would be so saddened to leave. Later that day, the carriage arrived in the village. Everyone was so excited to see the visitors and to see the princess who had been spending time with them. The courtier came with a message that King Gerwan and Queen Alina requested the presence of Thoran at the castle, and that he was to accompany the princess on her return. Galea and Thoran looked at each other and smiled. The crowd that had gathered in the village cheered. Galea hugged and thanked her woodland friends graciously, and then mounted the carriage with Thoran. In Ormarond, news came of the princess's rescue. Prince Voldhar, who had been anxiously waiting to meet his betrothed, was relieved, but also impatient for their bonding. Voldhar was true to the dragonborn male nature, dark, brooding, and easy to anger. He was ambitious, and saw Galea only as a means to gain control of high elven lands. At last things should be settled soon and organised. Galea's brother Prince Githandor had been spending this time amongst the Dragonborn. He found Prince Voldhar very prickly, surly and bad-tempered, but his sister, however, was the complete opposite. Takaya was sweet-natured, gentle and kind. He found himself quite fascinated with her and spent many hours in her company. She taught him much about the Dragonborn, their history and culture, which he found most interesting. King Drevan was always polite and accommodating, although the king and the prince were often found in serious conversation, speaking in low tones, which he found a little disquieting. He had been so greatly relieved when they received news of Galea's rescue, and knew that soon he must return to Eryndel. Galea, when she'd recovered from her ordeal, would be finally coming here to Ormarond to meet her betrothed Dragonborn prince. He couldn't help feeling nervous and worried for his lovely sister, as the prince was not the partner for her that he would have wished, but knew that future relationships between the 2 kingdoms relied on such a bond. The carriage bearing Galea and Thoran arrived at Fjalfosseren later in the day. Thoran was in awe of the castle when entering through the golden gates, having only ever seen the castle from a distance when patrolling the mountainside. There was a herald of silver trumpets from a high balcony, and a welcome party was awaiting their arrival. King Gerwan and Queen Alina were waiting at the stone staircase and rushed to hug their daughter. Thoran held back a little distance away, feeling awkward and self-conscious. The king and queen were very welcoming and courteous and came to shake Thoran's hand. King Gerwan proclaimed their undying gratitude to Thoran and said that he would be greatly rewarded for his bravery in rescuing their daughter. Thoran humbly replied that any woodland elf would have acted in the same way on witnessing such a despicable act. Nevertheless, King Gerwan welcomed Thoran into the castle, where he was given refreshment, and said that he must remain with them a while until the Thanksgiving service, which would be held at the Tree of Light in the Vale. Thoran meekly bowed and was shown out of the great hall, not before he and Galea looked at each other with a loving glance, which Queen Alina immediately observed, and her heart sank. Org was in hiding in the nearby realm of Ethigern, the land of the humankind horse lords. These lands bordered Eryndel to the west, through a mountain portal. Here he had hidden in the caverns of the Rondal Mountains, where he continued to develop his skills in scrying. During his travels through the frozen northern lands, he had spent a long time in the Fire Mountains, where he collected obsidian and amassed a great variety of magical crystals. He had crafted himself an obsidian mirror and was continuing to develop the skill of scrying in the hope of one day finally finding the hidden location of his lost orb of power. Often the visions were devoid of colour or form, just a swirling mass of shadows. However, during the last season his visions were becoming clearer, and he had seen several repeated visions of underwater columns and towers. His final vision had been a mermaid with red hair and a strange constellation of stars. The visions left him frustrated, like fragmented dreams that had no meaning or direction. The water in these latest visions swirled with amazing colour, and it brought to mind tales that he had heard of an enchanted sea in Eryndel. Whilst in a local tavern, Org overheard local men gossiping and laughing. They had heard news from Eryndel of a failed kidnapping of the Elven Princess Galea by goblins, and of her rescue by woodland elves. Org felt the anger in his throat and threw his tankard across the room in rage and stormed out. In a fit of madness, he returned to Eryndel through the portal from Ethigern back to the caves of Rom. He didn't even enter to speak with the goblins. He approached the main entrance to the caves, placed his hand on the rock, and summoned all his anger and power. The rock began to glow under his hand, and the ground began to shake. He released a bolt of energy that flew into the cave and exploded. There was a great rumbling from deep inside the cave, and rocks began to fall. He could hear the shrieks of goblins from within. He continued to surge with energy, throwing more bolts of lightning into the cave. With a thunderous roar, the mountainside shook, trees fell, and soon the cave entrance was obliterated, and nothing remained but a smoking pile of rubble and felled trees. Org retreated, now even more determined to finally find his lost orb and restore all his powers.